I'm Olivia Clementine, and this is Love and Liberation. Today, our guest is Carroll Dunham. Carroll is a medical anthropologist whose work explores human entanglement with other species, from microbes to yaks. Based in Nepal for 30 years, she has lived and traveled extensively amongst nomadic communities, including those in India, Mongolia, and China. A lifelong student of Buddhism, Tibetan medicine, and Himalayan medicinal plants, she is committed to amplifying indigenous voices and advocating stewardship of fragile ecosystems. She is currently the co-founder of Around the World in 80 Fabrics, revitalizing vanishing textile traditions to reduce petroleum-fueled fast fashion. A storyteller at heart, Carroll has authored 5 books and produced over a dozen documentaries for National Geographic, PBS, and BBC. As a Buddhist chaplain, she is passionate about resiliency and the human ability to thrive post-disasters. Let's start by you landing in Nepal. So you lived in Nepal, you were based there for 30 years. And what was the impetus to going there in the first place?
Well, first, I always say, for me at least, my life sort of, it was like Dorothy and Wizard of Oz. I went from black and white into Technicolor when I first landed in Nepal. I was born and raised in New Jersey, Exit 8, Jersey girl. And I always wondered, I just was like, there's got to be other ways of living than this suburb life, this narrative, this story plot. There's got to be more to living than this. There's got to be other ways to be human. I was born and raised in Princeton, and then I went to the university. And I couldn't wait to get out of the Ivy League. I find it very rather sort of stultifying, and very interesting intellectually, but not a lot of heart. The neighbor across the street was a little boy. I used to go under the fences and we'd play together with my best friend. And her older brother had just come back from Asia. And I was supposed to go to Sri Lanka. And I was very interested in college. I studying the anthropology of religion. I was very interested in engaged Buddhism. I was interested in how contemplation and activism, how did they communicate? What did that mean? How could you social change without being angry? At the same time, just to be sitting still when the world is on fire. So, how could these poles of our being intervene? And so I was very influenced by Joanna Macy's work. And I was going to go to Sarvodaya in Sri Lanka, but then a war broke out. And so this best friend across the street, older brother, said, you want to go to Nepal, you're going to fall in love with this great guy named Tom Kelly. And so he made sure I would go. He called up Tom's mother and said, hey, I have a friend who's going to Nepal. Does Tom need anything? He was in Peace Corps. And she said, yeah, I'm trying to get a camera to him. So she mails the camera to our neighbor. Our neighbor comes by, says, can you take this over? So, and at the time, so I was with a student at SIT. So I had to really fight hard at that time period. Princeton didn't believe in time, off or away. So I'm the next wave. In fact, I just had a whole bunch of old friends who were the old 60s hippies, been there. It was Christmas Kathmandu 1966, and they were showing all these pictures. And I said, I'm the next wave actually in the sociocultural history of Westerners in Nepal. I've done great interviews with some of the early white memsabs, Barbara Adams, and Inger was married to the white Russian, Boris Lasanovich, and their stories of their first moments coming to Kathmandu. So we were the next wave, and we were sort of like the nerdy student scholar types, or the students who were coming with the school programs. There was a Pitzer program. There was the SIT, as it was known. Now it's known as Global Learning. And so I came as a student. Instead of staying in a family stay, they put me in a monastery, a nunnery. So my family was a Buddhist nunnery in Swayambhu. And so that was really where my journey began. And I became fascinated by Westerners who became Tibetan Buddhist monks and nuns. And I said, I could be them and they could be me. And what is their story and who are they? And I interviewed people like Mathieu Ricard and many other monks and nuns, Westerners who had shaved their heads and had entered the Vajrayana monastic path. And so I was supposed to go to study like women in development. And I said, well, no, this is development. This is just inner development. So that was when I first got there. And then I bring this camera for this a crazy guy named Tom Kelly who'd been there forever and eating rice and dal bhat. And so he had been spending time up in Humla in far northwest Nepal. And he'd come on his big red Enfield motorcycle with his leather jacket. And he'd drop me off and he'd kind of expect like a peck on the cheek or that. I'm like, no way, there's 20 nuns looking at you right now. So he lured me up to an area in far northwest Nepal called Humla. And he said, he'd gotten a book contract and the writer wasn't able to do it. And he said, there are lots of nuns up there. So we ended up there. I didn't know him that well. And it was make or break it when you spend a whole winter picking lice out of each other's hair and you're hungry. We lived with a wonderful couple called Epi and Lobsang. They became like our grandparents. They lived in a cave in Yakba. And so he was originally a monk from Kham, from Eastern Tibet. He had studied in Ganden. And then when his teacher died, he was asked to marry the widow. And so they were on pilgrimage to Kailash when the Cultural Revolution hit. And so they were then on their way down. And the villagers of Yakba said, please, will you stay? We have a terrible problem. There was high infant mortality in the area. And will you live in the cave where we believe this whole rock face is as harmful spirits? So we lived in the cave there. I'd have to tell my husband, don't lean back against that pillar because it's actually moving with cockroaches. And dear Epi, who was just the epitome of compassion. She was really such a beautiful soul. She loved to put the old maggoty meat into the food. And we said, Epi, could we try it without it? And she said, but then it will have no flavor. And then that was 1985. And we went down, we left Humla to go, we helped many pilgrims were coming over the border illegally out from Tibet because it was the Kalachakra of 1985 in Bodh Gaya. And there was rumor at that time that would be the very last Kalachakra His Holiness would give in this life. Thank heavens that was not true. And that was a very profound experience for me, very, very powerful experience. And so to see the rawness of the devotion of so many of the Tibetan pilgrims down there at that time. And I think that was when I initially took refuge. Then I went back and I tried to ask. Jamyang Kongtrul was still alive and he was up in Woodstock. And I was then working on my thesis at Princeton and I went up and he was in retreat and the people around said, he never sees anybody. He's in retreat. I don't know why he's saying yes to you because he shouldn't. But okay. And so I would just go, can you teach me to meditate? I didn't know what to ask or how to ask or what to do. So when I was in Nepal, actually as a student, then part of the time I lived with my Tibetan teacher from SIT, Sonam Tapgyal, and he had a house right in front of Sechen, and they were building Sechen. They were building the Sechen monastery. And I was frankly terrified of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. I can't even begin to explain to you my experiences of being in his presence, where, we use the word kundun and we talk of His Holiness and things. And for me, the Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche had profound influence, but I my mind would go blank. All my intellectual or defenses, it was a quality of being. So I didn't know how to ask the right questions, or I just wanted to be in his presence. And he would come often to me in dreams because I think I was so scared to see him. And that started my my journey. That started my journey. I was really blessed. Nepal is such a cauldron of extraordinary beings. If you think of it almost like molecules like banging against each other on all forms. Yeah, I think you would have to be half dead not to, to encounter the Dharma in the Kathmandu Valley. And it's a great soup. And Bakha Tulku was a very, very important, and still is for me. I love him with all my heart. And he really taught me how to ground practice in everyday living. I learned my Dakini practices. I learned Sang from him, and he's so humble and has no ego, and he's an artist and was a renegade and a little bit of a rebel within the traditional orthodoxy, and so I love that, and a great scholar. And his kindness was immense, and I was very close with his daughter as well, Yeshi, and I traveled with her and Ian Baker. We traveled throughout Tibet together. And so when Ian and I were working on a book together, and we went up to see Mindroling Rinpoche, and that for me was very powerful. So at that time, Kondro Rinpoche was the translator. She wasn't wearing robes yet, still had her hair. And I remember, for me, that was a really important in my little journey. We all have our journeys, we all have our stories, but because I don't know for you, maybe you have this experience, or maybe someone who's listening. I just remember, okay, there was like a white fog with light almost penetrating through it. And then it was suddenly like I could think, and there were thoughts, and I was a little kid, and I'm crawling, on the ground, and I'm wow, and I'm looking, and I'm sort of like, and so Mindroling Rinpoche was the first person that I never had shared that. It was something that I used to feel sadness as I was growing up as a child and thinking, I'm getting further away from that, and I need to go back. I need to find that. What is that all about? And Rinpoche said, well, listen, you don't live here. You got to find Trulshik Rinpoche, and you need to, receive some clear light teachings from him. So then it was like a great odyssey. I'm sure that and I'm quite sure from my life and my obstacles and challenges, I always joke, I think I must have been a really badass Kampa bandito, must have done bad, nasty things in my last life. I don't know. I really don't know. But I would go up to Solo, and he would have just left. We kept missing each other for a long time. Finally, I meet with him, and he's like, well, I need the text. So it took me many, many years to be able to receive those teachings, and for which I'm, forever, forever, forever grateful. And yeah, Trulshik Rinpoche is a very important light in my heart, and in my trail, and in my path. We met at Lama Wangdu cremation, and Lama Wangdu came into my life when I was kind of broken. I probably always was broken, but I was really broken. I was working with, we always say never do business with friends, but I never got that memo. And there was a lot of betrayals and a lot of, broken trusts. So I was having a hard time, being able to trust my own even ability to evaluate who I should trust and shouldn't trust. And Lama Wangdu taught me fearlessness. He got me back up on my feet. He taught me the fearlessness of generosity. I find tragically in the West how capitalism influences dharma in a terrible way. And so we would do, amazing practices, with Rinpoche and, in Pashupatinath and some of the great sacred sites of Kathmandu.
And what was it in particular that he taught around generosity?
Well, so because his practice is chud, and chud is the practice of cutting through fear, but what was so special about Lama Wangdu was, I'll give you two stories and I'll get to your question. So I once was doing a film. There was these French filmmakers. They had a philosophical orientation. They wanted to kind of put everything into their box they already had rather than sort of seeing what was there. So we had gone to see many, many great and filmed many, many great lamas. And it was near the end. And I was like, I really think you should come and meet Lama Wangdu. And they were like, this is all the ritual. This is all the folk religion. This is nothing to do with, the core essence, the doctrine, and we want the big teachings. And so we came. Rinpoche was deep in Chud, and if anyone here has never heard Chud, it's different than many of the other monastic teachings. It's very melodic. It's traditionally more often householders, even though many monastic communities will also practice. Chud comes from Indian charnel ground traditions originally. So he was deep into it with the drums, and there's lots of ritual drama, and it's powerful energetically. And so he was kind enough because I had requested, and he's so generous. He made the time. So in the break, the filmmakers came up, and he immediately, he could see immediately, which was just like Lama Wangdu. I've never met someone quite so he could see what you were thinking. I remember once I looked up, I was like, wow, that's a really beautiful Vajrapani statue. And he goes, oh, I hadn't even said anything. I'm like, okay, no desire. I'm going to just only look at the Lama Wangdu. Any desire he will pick up. So he immediately went straight into a very, very profound teaching about the kata, and if it's white and pristine, but if it's in, you put it in the ash box. So in other words, what it's surrounded with, and yet what will stay pristine and pure. And he gave such an extraordinary Dzogchen teaching. They were just, their jaws were drops. And it was only like an hour. They said, but wait, can we go back? I'm like, sorry, you missed it. You either say that's the way it works. You either are there or you're not. He taught generosity through his being. If you ever did ritual with Rinpoche, his gusto. He was like this big laughing belly with, and he big hugs, warm hugs, but he would just grab the offerings, not little and sweet and delicate, but it was more and more. And yeah, I honestly have never met a more generous being. I mean, he really was not attached, and he was the great distributor. So it was always great because you knew if you made an offering to him, he would just give it all away. So you were always having to think so creatively of how can I offer something that I know will just be disseminated into the universe.
Oh, I love that so much. There's a lot of things you shared. Can we go back into everything
Of
pretty
course.
much? So maybe we'll just stick in the realm of Buddhism right now because there's so many interesting meetings that you've had. So maybe we could start with Jamyang Control. So you met him then in New York, and he the person you took refuge with.
I didn't take refuge with him. So I actually sort of technically, ritually, at the Kalachakra in 1985 is when I formally took refuge. So it would have been with His Holiness Dalai Lama. And I have one sweet little Dalai Lama story because with His Holiness. So when with Ian Baker, we were working on a book with my husband on life cycles of Tibet. This is many years ago. And so we go and we interviewed him, and he was, very interested in what was going on with the politics in Nepal. And, he wanted to know all about the emerging of the Maoist situation there, etc. But, and I was sort of trying to fish for quotes, and I'm like, isn't sort of everyone our teacher and everyone, because we're all Buddhas, and so shouldn't we see everyone as our teacher is that great American and egalitarian, and seeing what we can learn from each other. And I loved it because he'd been all very sweet, nice, and he suddenly went, "Argh!" He looked over at me I felt like he was like talking to like inside, and he goes, like this is not for everybody else, but it's like for you. Not everyone is your teacher. And I really am grateful because that's a very, very beautiful and powerful teaching. And it took me many years to learn discernment and learn to really keep the focus with one's teachers. So I'm very, very grateful for that lesson from His Holiness. I had the blessing to be at Khyentse Rinpoche's cremation in Bhutan, and that was a very powerful and extraordinary event. And I have to just tell this story. I will get back, but it's too funny. It's too amazing. This is too amazing. I was just in Bhutan 3 weeks ago, and I'm walking up this trail. Okay, I have had the blessing. I think I have been able to do the pilgrimage up to Taksang. Somebody asked me, maybe at about 45 times, 46 times. I think I'm really blessed. And each time it's like I'm indescribably happy and delighted. I feel such a blessing. So on my very first time I ever walked up there was right after Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's cremation. And of course, we had rainbows around the sun. And you had to start way, way back in those days. It was a long walk up. There was a sweet little mild-mannered monk, and he accompanied us. He became kind of like our little pilgrim. We were pilgrims on the trail, and we went up together. And then we came back, and we shared a taxi. And then as we got out, and he was so sweet and humble, he handed us his card, and we saw that it was the Nechung Oracle. We were like, oh my gosh, he was so sweet. So, okay. Take the tape forward. We're at whatever, almost 30 years later or whatever. And I see these Mongolian monks ahead. And so I've spent over 20 summers in Mongolia. And so I go up using my poor Mongolian, and I'm so happy because I've never seen Mongolian monks on the trail to Taksang. And they said, no, but you really need to meet our teacher. He's fresh from Dharamsala. I said, oh, that's nice. So I went, switched to Tibetan. We had a beautiful conversation. He seemed like a beautiful soul. Up the trail, my friend says, but don't you know, that's the Nechung Oracle. I said, what? So on the way down, I said, Rinpoche, did you walk up this trail, right? Were you here for Khyentse Rinpoche's cremation? So the beauty or the power of that trail is so, so precious. So I always say I had to wait 25 years for my teacher to come back and ripen in the form of Yangtze Rinpoche. Sean Price is an amazing monk and an incredible translator, and he helped to translate all of Khyentse Rinpoche's terma teachings. Rabjam Rinpoche really gave the foundation. I would say, like, filling in any of the cracks while I was raising children in my householder yogic way. So I joined with the Sangha, and we together fulfilled those practices. We would go every year to Bodh Gaya for over 10 years and received the full cycle of Rinpoche's terma teachings. And so I'm very grateful to Choklin Rinpoche and Rabjam Rinpoche for really filling those gaps and giving license for outrageous behavior. When you're as old as me, you go, but I could have used, maybe I've been outrageous without license before, or now that I'm so old, I sometimes want to go to bed. Maybe I don't want to be outrageous anymore. I mean, we remember when Rabjam Rinpoche was a young teenager. And there was a lot on his shoulders to be able to carry the lineage, and he's done that with such extraordinary grace and purpose. He's about to give amazing, huge teachings, Rinzin Terzo, all in Bhutan. And for the Yangtze Rinpoche, he's coming in from a different place. I feel like the young Kala Rinpoche as well. I'm so grateful to them that I think some of the things, at least I'm just saying as a Westerner who's lived in Asia and lived in Nepal for 30, 40 years, and as a mother. So as a mother, there's something about tradition, but there is also something about innovation. And The challenges in the monastic worlds, in some monastic situations, can be like really bad British boarding schools. The abuse that can happen. I mean, I was amazed. I just led a National Geographic trip, and the Bhutanese guides, for the first time, the guides were saying, we've had sexual abuse problems in our monasteries. We're now trying to work with them. But the fact that they're even talking about it, and that's what they're telling like tourists who don't even know that there were problems or have been problems or things like that. So I am really excited about the next generation, this real complexity of keeping the Dharma not brittle and dry and desiccated, but juicy and alive and vibrant and meaningful in our times. So
Yeah, I so appreciate hearing that. And Trulshik Rinpoche, so tell me about your experience with him.
well, I'm going to just tell you this a simple story. Some people, their relationship with the Dharma will be purely intellectual. For others, it would maybe emotional. So for me, I remember when I was young, I used to cry. I'd go like, I'm never going to find a teacher. And I'm going to be left down. And how do I know if I have found? And the teachers do. They find us, and if you let your body will tell you or know you. So like my experiences of Trulshik Rinpoche, similar to Khyentse, were just pure presence. Like I just have such great memories of being up in Tutencholing. And I remember him telling and crying with me, telling his story of his escape out of Tibet. I mean, he was so lucky. So he had, first of all, just rebuilt all of his monastery in Tibet in Rongbuk. And if he had been at his residence, he was up checking on the Tsetsampas. These are lifelong retreatants that were all up in the glacier just at the base of Mount Everest and Chomolungma. And so he was checking on them when the word came that the Chinese were here and he had to leave. So he went right over the Nangpala into Khumbu. He couldn't even go back to his home, pick up his bag, anything. We did a film and included him in it. And we went up to a place where when he came out of exile, he went on a 3-year retreat. And it's a sacred lake that's just north of Day's Walk, above Tutencholing. And so there was a nun who told me this powerful story that she was his attendant during his time he was doing that retreat, and that a vulture came flying out. It was evening time, came flying out and circled them 3 times, and that it had a tear in its eye. And it spoke to them. I'm just telling you the story. You can make of it what you like. And he said that the vulture said, I'm your teacher. I'm Sato Rinpoche. And I'm so sorry you've suffered so much. It's been hard, with exile, coming from Tibet, all that you've suffered. Why don't you come with me to Copper Mountain Paradise? And Rinpoche took a breath. He said, no, I think I have work to do here in Solo. I will come. I think these people, I can leave some seeds of Dharma here. I will come later. And then the bird circled 3 times and went back. And then one of my great memories of the Trulshik Rinpoche this is a funny one. We were in this helicopter. It was a big old Russian helicopter. And the attendants come and they put a tiger skin down for him. And the sound's going really noisy. Rinpoche turns to me and he goes, I can't hear, but it's like, so Sompa, his attendant, whispers to me, he says, yes, in the old days, we Buddhas used to fly. Now we just take helicopters. and he had this huge bag of tsampa mixed with grains, and he made prayers and he blew on them. And they opened the door and the wind's coming in, and we went way down low, and all the villagers would come out and they would put their hands up in the sky because it was like raining barley, like, the blessings, so Rinpoche was using the technology to spread the blessings all over and through the land. And then I remember once going up for Mani Rimdu, and just wanted to get the prayer flags blessed, to put them up early. And it was early in the morning, maybe 6:37 in the morning. And I pulled the curtain a little bit, and there he was. He was in his 80s by then. And he was just simply doing his prostrations. And it was so beautiful. Even Buddhas do prostrations. So that humility practice is unceasing. And that was an embodiment of a great teaching. So,
in terms of language, so what Himalayan languages have you taken up, and how did you learn those? Because it sounds like you are, communicating with some of these teachers or people you run into.
I studied Tibetan, and people will joke and laugh because I sound like a nomad or a Drogba. I speak like a local, let's put it that way. That way. So I don't have a high language. I have, the language of the simple folks.
That's so good. What area do you think you've taken up Tibetan from? What nomadic area?
The dialect that's spoken in the Humla region, for example, which is influenced by Western Tibetan. So like, Central Tibetan, we say Dikarire, there they say Idichidakpa, it's like, it's just different. But so you have sort of along the spine of the Himalayas with, through Mustang and these high mountain areas. And I would really love to study. I mean, like I think of Françoise Pommeray, and we have friends who are, just exquisite Dzongkha speakers, or Sharchop in Bhutan. But my Bhutanese is not very good because I get lazy, because I speak Nepalese, and I'm very grateful. I really love and enjoy speaking Nepali. It's a very joyous, playful language, actually. And because we have so many 76 different ethnic groups in Nepal, and so it's a second language for everybody. It's not like you have to speak pure Parisian French or we won't listen to you. Everybody's trying to muddle along, and people are very open and understanding, and they care more about communicating than perfect grammar. So
Definitely. Did you learn Nepali from living there all those years, just picking it up naturally?
I did. I never studied it formally. In my old age, I want to study Sanskrit. That's what I need to start on. I'm Mongolian and Sanskrit. I got to work on. So
Wow,
a
exciting.
lot to work on.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll learn it quite quickly. You're so studious over there.
I think I'm one of those people that I'm a poster child. If Carroll can learn a language, anybody can learn. I'm not a natural language learner. And I mean, in Mongolian, they just laugh hysterically because they'll go, and I'll go, and I'll go, I like what I hear, and then what comes out my mouth. Some people who are great musicians, and they have beautiful ears, and they really have I have like a friend, Charles Ramble, and he's just exquisite with so many of the subtle dialects of Himalayan dialects. Or Mark Turin, he's an amazing linguist out of the Himalayas. And yeah, there are folks that really are just savants in the languages. I'm definitely not one of those.
But it's also nice that you speak the casual tongue as well, and that you at least have a way to be able to connect, which is most important as well. And I'm wondering, yeah, as we go back to the guy on the motorcycle that you spent some time with up in Humla, how long were you in Humla first, living in the cave?
Yeah, that was from, I think we went up in October. We came down in April, and that was the first time. But we went out in January for the Kalachakra and then came back. We did a book on the cycle of the seasons in Humla, so we spent a whole year all together up in that region. And with those communities, we have friendships now that, our generations that tell the stories. I'm an auntie to a good friend, Tenzin Dolma. I hope she's going to write the most extraordinary grand epic, which it should be, because the history and the stories of there are it's an extraordinary part of the Himalayas. Extraordinary and complex. So it used to be a part of the Zhangzhung kingdom. So Bun, very strong, but you would have a lot of different lamas coming down. It's a fascinating history of Bun and Buddhism and shamanism and the Hinduism that they practice up there. I don't think Orthodox Hindus would even, recognize either. Really fascinating. And then, like, so the Hindus even there will worship, traditionally honored Padmasambhava. They called him up there the Wali Kali Lama, so very interesting area, very complex.
And is that the area where you were studying polyandry?
I was studying polyandry. That's over 30 years ago. And in those time periods, in the Nyingma communities, the majority of people were practicing polyandry. The Maoist revolution and economic shifts, barely anyone is practicing anymore. And that has to do with economic abundance, which is a good thing. But there you would find, in Mugu, in Dolpo, in Mustang, sometimes, there in the early days, there used to be amongst the Sherpa, again, when the potato came in the 1920s, they became a little wealthier and less of that. But yeah, the polyandry, very interesting looking at, relationships and how we structure relationships and what's okay. Like for the Nyingma, for example, brothers never fight. Was one of the ideals. I mean, of course, brothers fight. We have ideals too. We say in our country here, thou shalt not kill. But fortunately, our murder rates still doesn't seem to, hit upon it. So the ideal and the real. But the notion of how do you, share your most precious object, there's less kids because there's only one woman that can be pregnant at the time. And then all the males are contributing. It was a tripartite economy. So one would be up in Tibet, trading perhaps, and then one would be with the animals down south or on the salt wool trades. One would be home. And then the most challenging times would be in the harvest time because everyone would have to come home to help with harvest. And that was usually wedding season as well. So you see things shift and things change and relationships shift and relationships change. We did an interesting film with BBC called The Dragon Bride. And we try to have her help to tell her story of what it means from a woman's perspective to know that you're going to be marrying all these brothers and what kind of future will you have, because traditionally a dragon, a woman born in the dragon, everybody would want to marry because that means that she would have the norbus, she would bring wealth and prosperity. They're known for their hospitality and their graciousness and a lot of qualities that they look for traditionally in a woman. And the Maoist time period in Humla was a complex one because if you're only having one woman with four brothers, that means then you have a lot of women that aren't getting married. And so they would stay in their brothers' homes and as labor, sometimes have a honey or a lover elsewhere. And it was interesting because up in further north, Limi, Halji, Jiang, those areas, if a child was born out of wedlock from a lover, whatever, that's great. That's just another member of the family that can help. But then as you move further south with the Sanskritization, Hinduization of the culture, it was not okay to have a child out of wedlock. And so I was learning from the women. I go out and help them carry them, manure on my backs and help them in the fields. And there's a lot of different ways of herbs and other methods that were used for abortion techniques. And that was when I started to become very interested in herbs and in medicinal plants, particularly. It was through women's reproductive, and they all wanted to know. They were like, wait a second, you're how old? And you don't have any kids? What do you know? And I'd be like, look, I can take you down to the local health, clinic. We go together. It's the same thing. And they're like, oh, that's too complicated. And you have to remember, like they would often share the pills, or you start to realize how complicated reproductive healthcare is and very tragic in the Humla region. would go up with medical expeditions with Roshi Joan Halifax, and we would find, like, in areas like that, it's so tragic because, people would be like, well, nobody's going to be here again for another how many years. So they would give like Depo-Provera. We'd find women with like, 6 implants. I have pictures. And, and you can imagine how they felt with all that hormone mix up in their bodies. Really tough.
Yeah, I can only imagine. So you're walking around with them, learning about their stories. At the time, you're just arriving in Nepal, right? So like, how are you communicating with them? How is that working?
Oh my gosh, frustrating. I had studied Tibetan down in Kathmandu while I was living in the nunnery. And then I'm up in Humla and I'm having a really hard time with their language, right? Because it's a dialect at first, really hard time. And I'm asking millions of questions of my husband. I'm driving my husband absolutely gonzo. And then we get snowed in. So we're stuck up there. Like, I remember one time I got really angry. I'm like, that's it. I'm leaving. And then he looks at me and he laughs. He's like, good luck, honey. It's like, it's going to take you 3 months to walk over those hills and mountains, aside the fact that they're covered in snow. Good luck. So we kind of had to make it work. And so we've been making it work for over 40 years.
Yeah, we actually speak about that because both of your adventurous souls found each other. And what would you say are some of the qualities you both nurture in your relationship to allow it to thrive all of these years?
Well, I mean, Thomas is an artist, and he's a photographer. He's a very sweet and sensitive soul. And he loves yoga. He's a pranayama practitioner, and we both absolutely love the Himalayas. we love Mongolia too. And yeah, we love wilderness. We love exploring. And my husband is really, like, I always joke, I would never know my husband as well if I didn't know Nepalese, because he came over as doing Peace Corps and he just blossomed, I think. And he's a different personality when he speaks Nepali than when he speaks English. He really is. He really is. He's much more playful when he speaks Nepali. He's much more playful. He's much more silly. It's really funny. It's really fun.
Do you speak Nepali to each other ever or always in
Well,
English?
the only thing is, and sometimes even as a whole family with my kids too, but we were like, no, you can only speak, mother tongue, they say with children, they say, no, they'll get it from everybody else. So we would have to work really hard because when Nepali can be like the language of love, like when you have a little baby, we'd have to like
Cut yourself off.
yeah, not easy. We'd want to speak Nepalese with them for sure.
So you arrive in Humla, you spend many months there, minus the Kalachakra, you go down maybe for a month. Is that how long Kalachakra
Yeah.
was? Or yeah, then you come back up and then you finish this kind of seasonal time together. So between that to getting married, when was that? Like how
It
long
took
was
7 years.
7 years?
That sacred mystic number seven,
Uh,
7 steps to Buddhahood, and but yeah, we lived together for 7 years. So after 7 years, you kind of know if you want to be together or you don't want to be together, and all their faults and foibles. So we decided to get married because I think also we were thinking maybe about having kids or something like that. And also we loved our projects and being out there, and we and I didn't mention we also raised 6 foster children before we had our own kids. So, and that was not a plan. I don't think we're very good planners. And so they were all kids who came from difficult circumstances up in high Himalayan mountain regions, from Humla, from Tsum, and from Hemabuti is from the Solukhumbu area, but her father had died in an avalanche on Annapurna. So they all had either one parent that was missing, and there were a lot of mouths to feed. And in all situations, none of them we sought out, none of them we weren't looking for. We weren't looking to adopt. People would say, "Great, can you, take care of our kids?" And we were so naive because we kind of thought, "Oh, well, yeah, we can, sponsor them at school and education. Yeah, we're happy to do that." But I think in the family's minds, it was like, "Okay, they're yours now." My parenting skills were all upside down.
I mean, because
And
you're in your 20s, right? Is that
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
quite
yes,
young.
20s. And we had situations with, unwanted pregnancy before I knew how to change diapers, I mean, it was complicated.
And were they all living with you?
No, they went to Mount Kailash boarding school, and Pema started at Sri Mandi at Trungpa Rinpoche's, then went to Mount Kailash, and they would come home for the holidays and the weekends and things like that. Yeah. I'm so excited because my granddaughter Tsering, I think, is coming, and she may be going to college and living with us here now. So it's really
Yeah, actually, I saw Pema right before I left, and she was telling me about all of this. So it's so exciting. Yeah, I mean, I wonder too, like for the lifestyle that you and your husband have, if it's possible to plan something like that. I don't think like bigness comes from planning, and like you're living in like such outside of the edges, like that's literally how you're living, right? You're exploring in between places. I just don't know if it's possible to be a planner in
yeah.
the realms.
Well,
Is it?
yeah, no, I think we so wanted to live in the moment and in the presence, and you know what it's like to be in Nepal, and that intoxicating presentness that is so spectacular. Like life can be really rich and full and engaging and interactive. Entanglement, right? I mean, there's a lot of people, it's a lot of density, and there's a lot of story, and it's all happening. It's never a dull moment, that's for sure.
Yeah.
um, there's all the ingredients for living a rich life, at the same time extraordinary pathos, extraordinary suffering, and in such intense levels that it's painful. After I did some years helping work with the medical expeditions in the mountains, I worked for some time in the burn unit at Beer Hospital, and it was just challenging, really, really tough. I mean, you see there women where the families have tried to light them on fire with their synthetic saris because the family's not giving another motorcycle or refrigerator, for the dowry. And with 1930s level medical care. And yet some of the most exquisitely compassionate, beautiful people I ever met were the workers in the burn unit. And it's so challenging because sometimes there's nowhere for the women to go.
Mm.
So, not only we need to try to raise money just for the bandages, just for taking care of them, but so many of them, didn't even have the rupees to the bus fare to get home. And then sometimes they have to go back into the very places where horrible things had happened. So, Bardo, the notions of Bardo or suffering yeah, they're real. They're not in other realms. You can also experience them in this world and in this realm.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. They're just like that extreme suffering, and then being also a country that's so apparently sacred, like everything sacred is also shared, right? Everywhere you go, you have that sense, and yeah, kind of the inner being kind of grappling with both of those is a lot to find
I think that's
relationship
the
with.
best thing about Nepal is
Yeah.
that the brain can't grasp it because it's so intoxicating, isn't it? It's like the good, the bad, and the ugly. You take a whiff in, and there's incense and shit at the same
So
time.
true.
sounds are like there's bells and then there's bad rap or whatever. You if you want to dissolve dualism, it's a great place to do that.
It's so true. So true. And I mean, also, you were there pre-market economy. Were there places that you lived where you were living on, I guess probably Humla, like farming, wild gathering, bartering? I imagine like up there in the mountains, you were sustained
Yeah.
on that. What was your experience of that? And what was the experience witnessing everyone around you living in that time?
Wow, the introduction of market economy, that's a huge one into Nepal. Well, I mean, first of all, to be honest, like my experiences in Humla, I mean, I remember being hungry. I mean, we were hungry. We were
Mhm.
really hungry, hungry a lot. And I remember there was a year there was a virus, so that the bees and the Japanese men had climbed a mountain, so they were sure that that had caused that was a virus that had killed the bees. So there was no honey, there was no sweet. Um, but the deficit was real. The change though in relationships with market economy to Nepal are enormous, because before that, and I will speak now of also in Kathmandu Valley and times living there as well, people really needed each other. I mean, reciprocity is obligation, and so obligation is through gift, right? So the gift giving, so you do that so that you will be okay when times are difficult or whatever, and you can get the return because the relationships have been made. So to see the market economy come is been exquisitely painful. And I would say not just for me, but any Nepalese Tibetan of my age, I don't think some of us will even talk about, oh, remember the old days kind of thing. But in terms of also just the ecology, the of the whole entire valley, Talaju's womb, a very sacred place that now, is like has almost a venereal disease of the rivers of the Kathmandu Valley, that I knew them when they were clean, and that's no longer the case. But to see the shift in relationship, especially like, so we have it's a migrant labor population, so mostly remittance economy. And in the early days, people would send money home, and because we all are linked, because that's family, to belong to the family. And then some of them realized, you know what, maybe I don't have to send the money home. And also with the tragedy of, the families don't understand, they don't know how hard it is when you're working in the Middle East and being treated lower than a slave, your sense of self and who you are, and the confusion and the pain of all of that. I mean, the market economy has been very painful and brutal to families and family structure in Nepal, in across the board, impacted and influenced. So the breakups you have in a lot of villages where you'll, there's a grandma taking care of a child because young couple's married, and then the guy goes off to try to get money, and then he disappears, and then the mom maybe has an affair with somebody and then runs off, and then who's going to take care of the kid? And so there's a lot of social issues that have occurred from this older way, the giving and receiving way, and understanding that and the flow, to suddenly going, how much, and seeing, yeah, the ostentatious display, and the consumerism, the explosion of consumerism. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I can't imagine too from your perspective because you've seen it in such a dramatic shift. Like sometimes there's a gradual shift, right? And maybe it's never really been fully intact in a long time, that pre-economy, pre-market economy. But you've seen it in your lifetime. And in the Kathmandu Valley, it is so extreme. Being up in some villages, the common story I hear is, oh, my children are now in Kathmandu, they're getting education. I don't know if they'll ever come back, or they're going to another country. And then you ask about agriculture. They have beautiful barley fields around, and you ask, well, will this continue? And they're like, oh, I don't know. And then everyone's waiting for the next parcel from Kathmandu to bring their dresses or their belongings, and all that closed cycle of self-sustenance
Yeah,
is no
exactly.
longer there. And it's very,
Exactly.
very heartbreaking to see that. And I'm wondering, just from your experience, because you know the Himalayas in and out, are there places that are untouched, or is just every place impacted?
Well, pretty much everywhere, you're going to find folks that have, relatives that are in the city or have gone to the Tri, or I mean, you can go to, remote parts of Mugu and remote parts of Humla. There are communities that have less links than others, but with technologies and communication that have also come through. I mean, I remember little things like when I first came to Nepal, wasn't a lot of furniture. So when you go to most folks' house, you'd sit on a sukul, you'd sit on a mat, and there might be a little tiny stool, but that was about it. And so I remember like suddenly like all the furniture stores. It's like, oh my gosh, that was a little marker. Then I remember Babatini. There was mannequins, and then they had on their hot pants, and I'm like, oh, that's a marker, because when we first came here, we were all taught we had to cover ourselves because it's so interesting when you think of the body and different erogenous zones. So like if I put this way down here, it show a little cleavage, that's not a problem. And in our culture, to show your belly like in a bikini, that was pretty radical in the 60s. But obviously with a sari, that's no problem, but don't show your ankle, right? So which parts of a woman's body were to be covered? So like nowadays you go to a wedding, and it's like you'll have a grandma will be in her sari, and then a middle-aged mom will be in her kurta, and then the young daughter sometimes will be in clothes so sexy and naughty that even in the West we would go, "Dear, don't think you should wear that out tonight." But to them, it's like, well, she's being modern. But as an anthropologist, part of me is slightly concerned, only just because what I see, I'm just talking about market economy, with women at least, is the commodification of women. There's not a lot of freedom there. Like actually, if we're looking at that evolution, and even in clothing, because then the young little girl that's being sexualized, like that's not necessarily freedom. So I worry about that. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
that's come
Yeah.
in with all the market stuff and all of those things. And another thing, now when you go to Nepal, the tragedy is like at our home, we have a family we live with, and Sita only was able to go to school to fifth grade. So education is super important. The kids are doing really well. But the thing is, they have no sense of social media. So to them, it's sort of like being modern, but the kids are like, they're on the computer or they're on their phone. Like that's a symbol of modernity, but they have no idea of the content, and they have no idea of the toxicity, and they have no idea of the suffering that's going on within that. So the hijacking of nervous systems. We just need to connect the kids with nature. That's what we have to
I,
connect.
and I want to get into that with your children. So you raised your children between, it sounded like, many different countries, like Mongolia, Nepal, maybe India. Will you just talk about raising your kids in Nepal, and like what ages were they being raised
Oh,
there?
sure. So I used to always joke that we were just like sheep that grazed, and we just had the rotating pastures, when we would just rotate different seasons, different times of the year. Because the thing with children is they really do need that stability. And Nepal and Kathmandu was always the home and the base. My oldest son was born at home in Kathmandu in Telajus Valley. He has a mark on his foot. He was, the blessing of the Devi is with him. And I really want to make sure that the four Yogini protectors, he would really have that blessing and that link and connection. And my younger son was born because his due date, was the day after Christmas. So we have a home in Goa in India on the coast, because we used to always spend our falls and our springs up in the mountains, and we needed to thaw out a little bit. So we would, in the winter, go down and we would do a lot of yoga and let the sound of the ocean kind of do its magic on us. So in the summer times, monsoon is, wonderful and magical. But sometimes then you start to get moldy and soggy too. So we, we had some very close friends, and Enke is Mongolian and married to Christoph, and their children were the same age as our children. And they kept saying, "Come on up, ride horses. We have gears. Come join us." And so that was like the steps were a profound place of healing. For me personally, I had, as I say, I'd been this hard time with obstacles, working with friends, and I sort of crawled up to Mongolia, and I'd had bad experiences on horses in Zanskar with a good friend, Kim Guts Chow. She's a wonderful anthropologist, has done a lot of interesting work on nuns. And I did a lot of interesting work. She was doing nuns, witches, and oracles. So I came in and she'd have me ask all the difficult questions about witches, because we had a lot of witches in Humla. And if you talk too much about witches, witches hear you and then they'll come. I could tell you witches stories till you're
I would love to hear witches stories.
purple in the face. And yeah, I do have really good, some interesting stories on interpretation. So I had fallen really badly because, all different horses have different language. And so I thought that by, pulling like that, I was making it stop. But in their language, that is go at full speed gallop. So I fell really on the hard. And so I said, never riding again. And so up in Mongolia, big storm coming in. Everybody else has gotten in the van. I love medicinal plants. So I was lost with the plants while I was on my horse. Mongolian rider comes in. He's like, "Oh, which means you dumb idiot. You were supposed to." So we're going, and he takes the whip. And when you're with a 40 horses going at full gallop, you have to surrender. You have to let go. And so I went through fear to the other side. I mean, it was a really powerful experience. And I sort of fell off the horse and was never the same again. And so the horses are profound teachers for me, very profound, that deep relationship and working with them. Horses know us better than we know ourselves. And so I'm so grateful Mongolia, we would go in the summers, and the boys, they started it too. I'd put them on here and ride them. And they have a sixth sense for horses. And they would ride in the Nadams with the local boys. And the thing is that, and the Mongols, they would love to who are these little, what upstart kids here, and it was tough and hard. And as a mother, you just close your eyes because they're like at full gallop. And this is like uphills, downhills, they fall off, they can be dead. I mean, it's really it's really terrifying. But Genghis Khan created this to create a man, and you find your himor, as they call it, which is like wind horse. So it's different in the Tibetan and then the Mongolian. We say lungta, right, in Tibetan. So it means you're good luck, you're young. But there it also means your decisiveness, your direction, your ability to make decisions. Genghis Khan had strong himor. And so a horse can give you that. So they were trying to create warriors. But what that gave my boys, is something, it's in the body. It's a bodily wisdom, because, they're going at full speed on these horses, and they have to trust. And they have to build that trust. And it's that's why the horse is a metaphor for the mind, and always has been in Tibetan Buddhism, and why Dharma is carried on a horse. And the horse is we can learn a lot from horses. And I'm really grateful to what Mongolia gave my boys, what the horses gave my boys. And growing up in Kathmandu is really rich. But I will be very clear and honest with you. It's very funny. I would take my boys up on pilgrimage up into Tibet. We went around to a lot of main sacred sites of central Tibet, and my boys would be like, "Mom, no more monasteries. We just want to play soccer, football." I think that, but then it's kind of beautiful because now they're in their 20s And if somebody asks them, they're sort of, I think they kind of are just the way Mongols or, high Himalayan people, you're like, what religion are you? They say, oh, I'm Buddhist. And you're like, what do you know about Buddhist? So I think there's still a little more of study and practice that can be done there.
But the foundation is there. It's in their roots. It's in their
I hope
blood.
so. I hope
Yeah.
so. Yeah. They have good
So
hearts. They
they
have
have
good
good
hearts.
hearts. Yeah. So for you raising them in that environment, it sounds like naturally they would be raised that way because that's where you and your husband wanted to be. But even just beyond that practicality, what was it you wanted most for them to glean from being raised in that way, like moving between these different cultures and
Thank you for asking that. It's a beautiful question. You know, the ability to love humanity and people in all their forms, in all their ways, to be at ease and see the humor and the joy of the diversity of life. So Nepal, I mean, oh my gosh, the rituals, like when you live in Nepal, there's a festival for every different ethnic community is celebrating. One of our favorites is Ma Puja, which is just so close to my heart, at least, which is usually practiced in the fall time around Tihar or Festival of Lights, Diwali, they call in India. But the Newars have Mahapuja, and you roll up the carpets and you create mandalas out of whatever harvest you've had that year. And we always made it our own family way, the way Thanksgivings, everyone has different ones. And we go to visit our Newar friends. We have beautiful ones with them. But then at our home, we kind of jazz it and we take all sight, sound, smell, and we play drum. We create, you say things you never would say. You bless and honor each person in the family. And you always start with mama first, the origin of all things. So the family together with that harvest and the light, the inner light, as it's going, just as fall is going to turn into winter. It's something very deep and very profound. And then you sweep it all away, you put the carpet back. It's your own secret, private family ritual of bond and linking together. So powerful, so beautiful. And the Newars, no one is more, more brilliance on the life right cycles and life right rituals. I've performed Buro Junkos for my mom here, and my son had his Pasni in New Jersey. The relatives are still talking about it. And so Apasani is the rice feeding, but basically you honor them as divine, their last, before they become human, you welcome them as humans. And then at the end, you have Buddha Junkos for your elders as they first turn 77 years, 7 months, 7 days, and all the way. There's about 4, 5, 6 of them. Very elaborate rituals, very profound. It's a lot better than getting a gold watch. The festivals and the rituals, which is really about that community bonding. But I will say, there's other things too. Nepal has had a very tumultuous last 20 years. So there was also Maoist revolution. My children would go to school. There would be sandbags with people with machine guns out in front. They've also seen really difficult and painful things. And, we survived all the earthquake together. They went out to help in communities and in villages. They saw some nasty things, horrible things. Yeah, you can see, as we all know, in Nepal, you can see things that with your raw naked eyes out the streets are, I always used to say that Kathmandu is my university. You can get a PhD just by living in Kathmandu. Very rich,
yeah.
rich, complex place and
Yeah.
extraordinary beings. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And I love that you bring up to the rites of passage and even what you're sharing right now, the rites of passage of just daily existence there. Yeah, seeing everything.
And where ritual is just a part of everyday life. And that link, you can imagine as a child and you're raised with Kukur Puja every year. You love it, right? You You can't shake those things.
I have this one taxi driver when I go visit Kathmandu who I call up when I need a ride. And last time I saw him, I offered him a banana. He was like, I can't eat bananas for another 6 months until this puja happens. And I was like, oh, he's like, but I love bananas. And I was like, it's just like, when does that happen, right? Yeah, because he's grieving his father's passing and he can't have any sweets until the cycle turns. A little
That
bit,
sense of
yeah.
connection is so deep.
So, I mean, it's so sweet, the holding of each other's lineages in that way, like that there's a way to work with the passing of time. You don't have to pre-think, okay, how am I going to process the passing of a parent? This is what you do, right? Like this is what you
Right.
don't do. It's such a gift to have that.
Oh, I think it's one of the best places on the planet to die, actually. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. They absolutely know what to do. It's also a great place to give birth, as I was trying to say, actually, too, because women are treated so nicely, and you have sutkeri 49 days just to bond with your child, and they give you special foods and special massages, and they know how to. It's not a
That's
bad.
good to hear. So I thought we could move a little bit into some of your, I mean, we're talking about a little bit already, but more of your anthropological work. And just starting first, I think today kind of the theme seems to be relationship. When you're researching a topic that is found in a community or a family or a person, I imagine many times you don't have a personal connection ahead of time. In some places, perhaps you're not there for a long time. And I'm wondering what you've learned in terms of creating relationship and reciprocity and safety for those you're learning from, so that you have this kind of ability to share.
I so appreciate that. It's so simple. It goes back. Like, this is what I love when we go back to our core roots of Buddhist ethics, and we think of even the six paramitras, and we think of patience and kindness. And if we can listen, if we can approach with an open heart, people will respond to that. And we have to respect, what people want to talk about, what people don't want to talk about. And it's different in different cultures. I mean, how many times have you had in Nepal where somebody's like, how much money do you make? And you're kind of like, excuse me, like, for us, that's not a polite question. Just like I have to gently remind, in Mongolia, you don't say, how many animals do you have? Classic first American question. But, that's sort of like saying, how much money's in your bank account? Right? There's a guy named Paul Rabineau used to say, comprehension of the self through detour of the other. If you've ever had your pulse taken with Amchi Sherpa, anyone who's ever had a pulse taken by a traditional healer, it's a deep listening, and you feel seen. You feel recognized. You are sometimes almost uncomfortable because you feel recognized, because someone is just sitting quietly in deep silence, but paying attention. And so it's really about coming with good intention, open heart, and an ability with deep listening, being ready to deep listen. So I have found in Nepal often, there's especially a lot of elderly women who just don't feel heard, don't feel listened to. So they feel grateful to have questions asked to them. They're happy to talk. Now, I have also done work, in brothels and with commercial sex trafficking, where the worst thing I could do is to speak Nepalese, because that was the language they spoke as kids before a lot of trauma happened. So I'm just like re-triggering them with trauma. So you have to be exquisitely astute and emotionally intelligent, and also with timing. I love when you think about anthropology and questions, it's like, what is going to be your first question? What are your middle questions? And what are your last questions? And what is just going to be spontaneous? You know this better than anybody. You are asking questions all the time. And so how do we warm people up to feel comfortable? And then where can we maybe put in a few difficult questions or things? Or do we feel like we've created enough bond or presentness where we can ask hard questions? And then how do we complete our session so that we feel like that bond is still there and we're complete in some way, or that this conversation can be reopened again. I think it's just like touching into our deep humanity. There's no magical secrets. It's really about taking a breath and being deeply present.
Yeah, I really appreciate that answer. I think that piece you also say about the cultural delicacies, and I guess maybe what I hear too is just the humility of that. Like you make mistakes, you learn what's like totally not okay. Because you're
All of us
talking
have made mistakes.
because I mean you're speaking to people about some pretty intimate matters. That's why I was very curious. So, speaking of brothels or sex trafficking or yeah, polyandry that we spoke about earlier, this is like intimate matters, like literally the most intimate parts of someone's life. So yeah, I really value hearing that kind of like feeling in and just being in the process as two humans connecting.
Yeah, because it's just like how you phrased your question, which is the truth is you have to connect and you have to create relationship for there to be a genuine flow of information. And there is a way where anthropology can be, I've had many people who are just like, they have loved being able to share their stories. And it's been very healing, even sometimes very painful and difficult. Now, I'll give you examples like, during the Maoist revolution, I had a good friend, anthropologist, and, she's going down in Nepal Ganj. And so working with human rights. And now I need to write up my report. So, and how many times were you raped and what happened? And it's like, you are just re-triggering and her realizing like it's so horrible. And it's also with the economic impact because it's like they get back in their white big Jeep and then they drive away. And people going, all I have is this. And you want to rip this away from me too? We saw the disaster vultures and the earthquake, and they come in, and there's press that can come in and they just want the story. Our son was devastated by that. And I said, hey, stop. You don't need to do this. You speak the language. Put down your cameras. Go into Bhaktapur and just just ask people, do they need help? Just do that. And then if they want to tell you their story, they need to tell you the story, then you can say, I can help you to tell your story. But you don't need, to go in there because sometimes when people are just like, okay, I'm on assignment, I'm going to get this story and get in and out. And, that's not about creating relationship.
Yeah. And I mean it's great hearing that from you because you have worked for quite official organizations like BBC or National Geographic. So it's so wonderful to know the level of integrity too of how you enter into an environment and
Oh yeah, I mean, I could tell you, like I was worked with this one BBC presenter, and oh my gosh, this woman, she was of Polish origin. So when we went into the most radical Maoist youth group, and of course, and dangerous at that time, they were responsible for some of the greatest violence that was happening in the country at the time, and on the wall, of course, is Lenin and Mao and Stalin and Prachanda. And it just triggered her. And she goes, I can you to give me one good thing that Mr. Stalin there did. We go to see the army general who had been exploded by a bomb, the Maoists there. So he was in a wheelchair, paralyzed. And she gets him all angry and riled up. Then we go to see the royal astrologist. She gets him riled up. And I just was like going, this is easy for you because you leave and get on a plane. I live here. I had to make sure I made a safe way to get to my house. It was dangerous after talking with the youth group at that time period. And then having to work with these other folks. So repairing relationships, restoring relationships. So yeah, it really depends, what you want and where you are. I used to say to my husband, like during the Maoist time, it'd probably be better if you really want to go deep in the Maoist story, we need to not live here. You can't while we're here. You have family. Can't do it. It's too dangerous.
Did you not do the Maoist story then at that point?
Yeah, not, I mean, he saw things that he can't unsee. He was there after some very major conflicts and saw really horrible things. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, it was a really rough conflict.
Yeah, yeah, I
More than
can.
a lot of people realize. But.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's so interesting just hearing like as I'm like kind of feeling through the some of the different things you've shared and like that non-dual experience that you've lived so clearly because your work has put you there at the front lines and your passion to be connected to people and sharing their story and your enjoyment of connecting with people. It just feels, I feel the risk of it all, the aliveness of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to be. That's when I sort of meant a little about remember when His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, "Not everybody's your teacher."
Yeah, I was like, you're gonna have to be careful. Like he's like, I
You
see the
know,
future for you, and you're gonna meet a
don't.
lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's like a whole tangent because I'm so curious about, well, obviously the pollution rates and agriculture there. You lived there, I think, when there were still farmlands or even around
oh
Buddhanath
yeah.
Stupa.
Oh yeah. I mean, I always joke, those of us that studied Buddhism, that came from the West and came to Nepal to study Buddhism at that time, were all the folks that flunked Impermanence and Buddhism 101 in our past lives. So we were here to watch this extraordinarily rapid rates of change, unbelievable, and and I mean, to bear witness to the environmental devastation of the Kathmandu Valley, very exquisitely painful to bear witness to that. I would not lie to you. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you see a pathway forward?
Don't underestimate the beauty and the brilliance of the Nepalese by
Mhm.
any means. It's challenging. I take folks that go from Nepal to Bhutan and then they don't understand Nepal. And I go, well, first of all, let's just look at the demographics, let's go at the triangles. In India, the triangle is like this with a lot of the so-called untouchables on the bottoms in terms of just ethnic demographics according to Hindu caste descriptions. Nepal, what is like this: too many chiefs, not enough Indians. Why? The Mughals came down into India, and so then you had the Hindus migrating up, I mean, some were there earlier, but the large majority, a big blow up. And who were they? It was mostly the Kshatriyas, the warrior caste, and the Hindus and the Brahmin caste. Those are the ruling castes of Nepal government. So what you have is a lot of chiefs and not a lot of Indians, so to speak, right? So that we don't have the large numbers of so-called untouchable castes, etc. And we can go into, the debilitation of that. And from a governmental level, like I think it was fascinating watching the earthquake happen. And for the first time globally, it's like, well, what are you guys going to do? And Nepal government's like, we lose villages every year with monsoon, with landslides. We just went from feudalism not that long ago. And you're asking us to respond like a services, like I will do services for other ethnic groups and other people there. No, we're here to collect taxes. Like we're not here to actually provide services. So you're starting to see, like, look at those demonstrations, how for the roads in Boda, et cetera, things like, with water, Malimchi, things are happening. Actually, there's some really interesting things happening. And we know the tragedies, huge, massive brain drain of the best and brightest, well-educated that have left. And there are some folks that are coming back and are trying to say, what are we going to do? Honestly, I go for all my medical health care in Nepal. I don't do it here. I have so much more respect, confidence, and in terms of even dental care, the level, the sophistication of the machinery that they're using and their education levels. So I think that, Nepal is a very complex place. It's a lot easier in a place like Bhutan, where they have, the ethnic diversity is much, much less than it is in a place like Nepal. So with that ethnic diversity and with its history coming out of feudalism, it's complicated. You have that density in such a small, teeny area. So yeah, it's challenging.
Yeah. So let's just speak on longevity. In the modern world, we certainly hear about this focus on how can we live longer? How can we be more youthful? Like, how can the health of our mind, our sexual vitality, which we might elaborate on in a future conversation, in general life force and lifespan, there's a huge market for this right now. Yet this isn't a new area of
Oh
interest for
yeah.
humans. This has been around also for a long time.
It's such a profound and a complex issue. I mean, yeah, look, you go from Silicon Valley, where right now they're putting big money into all this because, we're obviously getting an aging population even here in the US. We look at demographics globally. Actually, we're getting less people, which is a lot of us think is really fantastic economically for people who love capitalism and only have a growth model. Longevity is quality, and the quality of our longevity and quality of long living. And obviously, Rasyanas in the Hindu tradition, Chulen in the Tibetan tradition. There's a lot of texts. Yes, yogis have been thinking about this for a long, long time, only because as we all know, when we think of it for a minute, like it's so evolutionarily, we're just like a blip, where our lives are so short. We're sort of just like those little maple wings that come down from the trees and don't hang out for very long. And in terms of having real impact, some could say with impermanence, maybe that's just perfect. Maybe we humans, it's short, sweet, and brief. But it's interesting when we look right now at plants, because there was historically always this search for immortality. The Himalayas was always known as the resource for where the longevity plants came from. And it really is interesting when we start to look, like some of the saucerias, for example. There's some of the vascular plants, the highest growing vascular plants in the world, of course, they found on Mount Everest, not surprisingly. I mean, because not everybody climbs everywhere. And so trying to understand even that of, what is the mechanisms in that plant, when we're looking at biomimicry as well, that enables it to live so well at these high altitudes. We have discovered that we have a gene for hibernation. It's not been activated, not been used, but probably like from our Neanderthal cousins in the old days, how we find an ancient early man in these huge caves. I always joke because we go up to Mongolia and we always say we have to wake everybody up. They've sort of been sleeping through the winter. They have different metabolism. And then they have this like almost like wolves, super powerful force of energy, where we're more like agricultural energy, our metabolism that we balance over time, and how with 9 to 5 industrialism and agriculture, how we expend our energy. When we look at the blue zones and we look at where humans are living long, we look at diet, we look at exercise, connection, community. Actually, it's not so complicated. I do remember like my good friend Dave Schlim, who is a close friend of Choki Nima's and works a lot with Western doctors here. And he always used to say, because he was the doctor for a lot of the old great lamas and everything, and he just say, I just don't get it, because we definitely don't see any dementia. I've never seen dementia. I don't see that in these old lamas. I do think it would be more interesting to be looking at meditation studies more seriously with long-term practitioners and aging, because you haven't really seen that. We're looking with the MRIs for bliss, we're looking for compassion, we're all these pieces, but in terms of the more like what's interesting in terms of telomeres, does it impact or not, or things like that. Traditionally, the immortality, or should we say longevity was really so that we could master practices. It was really because to make sure that we really could achieve moksha. I mean, historically, that was what the yogis, they were studying the long life thing. So just to make sure that they could get their minds in the right place to prepare for the transition of dying. So it's ironic when in the West, it's like all about and just not dying. Plasticity studies in the mind is really encouraging for showing we can continually be growing and moving and creating new synapses, and we have to work on that with physicality, though. And it is important what you eat. diversity is very important too, not to have a mono diet. There are herbs and magical so-called elixirs and all those things, but I actually think it's just like love, community, laughter, and dancing and singing. We haven't danced and, we're losing that as a species. We need more singing and dancing. Vajra Tantra says, any good yogi must dance and sing. So
Well, coming from you, who's an herbal enthusiast, that says a lot. Well, we're going to get more into this in a future moment, so I won't delve too deep. But I guess I wanted to close talking a little bit about textiles because that's where a lot of your attention is lately. And you have co-founded Around the World in 80 Fabrics. And since you're an anthropologist, it's always so interesting to know origin stories. And I'm wondering in your research, or like way too much research you've recently done, perhaps, why is it that we wear, like, when did we start wearing clothes? What was the purpose of that?
well, it's so interesting for if one is from a Buddhist practicing sense, we say Tantra means, to weave historically, traditionally. And I didn't intend to get into textiles, but I have a close colleague who's a marine biologist, and she was just getting so tired of the microplastics in her work sites. So when we think of food, clothing, shelter, and we think of the future, right now we are in a materials revolution. We have to be. It's either going to be change the way we live on this planet, or the potential being the architects of our own extinction are high at this point in time. I mean, I would imagine there may be a few small bands of smart folks. I think if you return and try to connect back with nature and, get out of thinking that AI and the cyber, yes, it can help. It can help us. It can assist us, but it's also going to rob us of a lot if we're not careful. So when you ask like when and clothing and its origins, it's really interesting because we think that actually the evolution of lice are most likely give us the clues or evidence to when humans most probably first started wearing clothing. And it depends who you talk to, but some people say almost 170,000 years ago. We were hairy. We lose our hair, which they think sometimes it has to do with maybe being upright and then sweating because we're running and chasing after and getting our, prey, etc. And so we lose our hair. Then we start stealing, skins from other animals to wear. For most of history, people have only worn, we call them the big five. So you can probably guess what those are, like cotton, hemp, linen, silk, and wool. And the earliest that we have, I mean, I don't know for you, but if you've ever looked at a flax plant, I would not go, I'm going to wear that. It wouldn't be my first thought. It's a beautiful, mine is growing in my garden now. It's blue, flowered. But these bast fibers to think, I want you when you're in the fall and you'll start to see the dry cords, imagining the twisting of this human twisting is something Neanderthals were doing too. This is a very ancient part of our humanity. 20,000 years of women work. We think of how much time we spent trying to get food, we were probably trying to get clothing too. So back to the lice. Lice used to only be head lice. And about 170,000 years ago, we start to see body lice. And they think that they migrated down when humans started to wear clothes. What's interesting is that in the archaeology of textiles, it's something that degrades so quickly. They're so ephemeral historically. So in the old days, there was very little of it. And it was women only starting to get into studying them and looking into them. And what's happening, ironically, with climate change is with glaciers melting, because traditionally it would be like in bogs or in salt mines, or we'd find out in dry deserts. This is where we find the oldest remnants of clothes that we have. And the oldest we have is of some flax 30,000 years ago in a cave in Georgia. But so when you think of humans, we're almost like bugs or something, and we wear to show our hierarchy. You say you are what you eat, but you are what you wear. And the importance of clothing in hierarchy, society, and, am I single? Am I available? many different signals and traditions worn with it. But our project is really about educating people to what do we wear, where does it come from, and where does it go? So we're getting awareness with food, but having ethical and conscious clothing of really understanding, well, okay, what's the biodiversity? What is the natural history of this actual material? And then whose hands, who actually made it and who wove it? So not only the ecosystems where it comes from, but then at the end of its life, I would do these things where we take mud and we would put all the different kinds of clothing in, and you can look at how fast it biodegrades. There's an amazing project right now called Soil Your Undies. The USDA has, yep, I didn't make it up. And you bury underwear in the ground and you see how long it takes for it to biodegrade. Of course, then the elastane doesn't, because most people don't realize 70% of all clothing worn by humans today is made of petroleum. And right now, our closets have grown over 8 times the size. So we have enough clothes on this planet right now for the next 6 generations. If we closed every single, we don't need to make any more. The tragedy is the petroleum industry with new energies has gone into the clothing industry, all that wonderful stretchy yoga pants. And the thing is that they're overproducing massively, and it's causing waste. There are whole mountains down in Chile and in Ghana, and now third world countries don't want to take the Western excess waste. We think, oh, we'll just send it off to recycling. Less than 1% of your clothes that go recycling. So now they're even looking at grinding it up and making it into, building materials. But the problem is when it's made already of petroleum, is the microfiber shedding. So they're trying to look at how you treat it. These are real challenges. So being aware, just like what you eat, what you wear, and its impact even on the microbes on your skin, and then understanding where it comes from. So that's what we're trying to work on.
Yeah, it's so fascinating and so needed. I heard you share once that, for instance, the waste from temples in India are being used to dye fabrics. What are other ways that waste is being used in the textile industry to help with such, this overload, the 6 generations?
Yeah, I would say keep your eye on India, which is where the foundation of so many textiles have come from. We even think cotton, think of indigo, the word India, indigo. And so you have things like agricultural waste that is being fed to microbes, synthetic biology, and then it creates polymers for the new, and many people think that's going to be the future of clothing. Right now, they still have challenges with energy, scaling it up. People are making clothing now from mushrooms as well, growing, which is looking very exciting. From pulp, the waste like fruit juice, you can take all that wasted pulp and leftover, and they're feeding again that waste to microbes that are then making the polymers and the threads. So there are some exciting things that are going on. And I've never seen so much innovation in the space. I am personally not what one friend calls a technological utopianist, that technology is going to solve all our problems and then we'll be happy. I think we need to change our mindset, and it's challenging because in the same way that we talk about being hijacked by our phones, et cetera, our nervous systems, I don't know if you've seen recently, Patagonia just came out, like literally consumerism. It's the dopamine hit, ding, 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 just like people on their Instagrams or whatever, ding, ding, they're just getting their dopamine hits. So we have to find more healthy ways to get our dopamine hits. We're drowning in stuff. We really are like the Wali. And so returning back, like we are makers as humans, like craft and making. It's like we're walkers by nature. So I love to walk. I'm a big pilgrimage girl. I kind of walk because that's what we were made for. And we are made to make, to spin and to fix and make. And this is scary because this can hijack our attention. And we know attention is our most precious thing that we have. And so I think that if we can reawakening craft is a very, very exciting thing. And better care of our clothes? And can we buy clothes that we can just throw into the compost when we're done?
Yeah, because then also the making takes more time, so we're not just mass producing. Are there any policies for the textile industry in terms of just not being able to produce a ton?
Thank you, because exactly, there's what the individual can do, and then there's mass and system change, which is what we need so desperately. Of course, Scandinavia is ahead of everybody, and they also are doing more interesting things. There's called tennicel, and they're making out of cellulose, which is using wood waste. So after you've made furniture, you're making paper from wood leftover, the leftover of wood, you can actually, they're also making really interesting clothing that is very much similar to some of our polyester and our rayons in terms of how it stretches, which is, we seem to really love our stretch right now, which we didn't have before. So the need for policy change is where it's at. It's like, as we know, no different than climate change itself, where tragically we don't see the political willpower for what really needs to be done. What's most exciting, though, is in the textile world, as an anthropologist, there's a lot of creatives there. And so they're pushing the envelope. In a way, it's like fashion is the Trojan horse, because I think they're getting further, because they're people that are comfortable thinking outside the box, and they're pushing the envelope for policymakers, et cetera, in very exciting ways that, like electronic waste. We have such a major problem with electronic waste. But I think fashion, we're ahead. And I think other industries are going to start to look at what's going on in that space, because they're doing things different. Now, the biggest challenge is greenwashing. I mean, there's so much greenwashing. We need more labels, just the way food, we became more conscious and we write down what's inside. So if you care about it, you can read and see and go, oh my gosh, this is all sugar, whatever it is. So we have labels on our clothes, but they don't tell us everything yet. So I think we're going to see our labels become more sophisticated. So for example, I could try to sell you and say, hey, this is a hemp, pure hemp. But the thing, what I haven't told you is what the treatment is. What was this treated with? So I could put a PFAS, a very toxic, to make it non-wrinkable, so it doesn't wrinkle, on top of it, on the treatment of it. And you don't know that it's on there, and it could have really serious health implications. So there's a wonderful book by a woman named Alden Wicker, and it's called To Die For. And it's going into depth on we haven't really looked at, actually, that a lot of our clothes are made of toxic things, and that we, need to return back to healthier materials.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because the connection with biodiversity and textiles is such a direct link. So I'm grateful for your illumination on this topic.
And we've had such joy, because you start to see it's such a part of being human, just like eating, just like shelter, the richness of community cultures. And there is a revival that's going on right now. So from cotton, the Khyentse cotton in Oaxaca, which is a forest cotton, it doesn't need any water, up to fish skin makers up in Alaska that are, using the fish skins to make leather alternatives. And after they've eaten the protein, and muskox and bison and camel for the animal proteins. And then we have, of course, lotus. The lotus fiber is one of my all-time favorites. And there's banana and pineapple. And we're working with an amazing artist from Thailand, and he creates out of beetles. There are these iridescent beetles. Traditionally, they would use for decoration. If you ever go to the V&A, they have these beautiful collections in India. And the queen of Thailand is totally into beetles. So she has a whole room that's covered with these iridescent beetles. So after they have lived their life, so you don't have to kill them. They don't have a short life. And then the beetle is utilized. So he wove into, actually, he made like Buddhist sutras. I could send you pictures. They're really beautiful. But just trying to give examples of the crazy wild things that you can possibly wear creatively. And it is a real story, because there aren't enough fields for us all just to wear natural clothing at this time period, which is why this synthetic what we can possibly do in the laboratories is also really, really important.
It sounds really exciting. I feel like everything we've kind of traversed today shows that there are choices one can make to live a more enriching life. Like they're still there in this world, you know?
Oh, there is, the curse of interesting times, as the Chinese say, but the danger of despair, that we live in the Anthropocene, and excuse the French, but is actually just not helpful. It's just not useful conversation, and it's boring. How can we shift to what's known as the Symbocene, is, to work with nature? We have to return back to, I believe, to a deeper, much deeper, just the way the Jains, they were which is so much of Buddhism and no harm, ahimsa, all comes actually from the Jains much earlier, because the founders, they were like botanists who loved to study nature. We need to go into deep understanding of nature to figure out how we're going to live on this planet. Otherwise, we could be one little blip of plastic in the epicene of time, homeoplasticus, if we aren't careful.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Carol. I'm thankful that you're in the world. And is there anything else you personally want to share? I mean,
Oh my gosh, you've been so patient. I've just blathered away. No. I'm
no.
just really grateful to you. I'm grateful to you for, delving and asking far more interesting people than myself deep and big questions. I just know that if you take a little bit of risk and you want to go and explore the world, and you create bonds and meet people, unexpected, amazing things can happen. Tragedy and horrible things can happen too, but you can't know unless you get out there. And we need each other. We have to learn to collaborate. It's the only way we're going to actually make real change in this world, is together, not just alone.